Hi, a quick introduction to the legislature here. We're going to look at what the functions are. Now, we're going to go through all of the functions here. We're going to list the functions and then we're going to go through each and every one of them separately in a different presentation. But this is an overview, and as a result of which it will be a blissfully short presentation. In order to flash it out, I'm going to direct you towards this one. There is a link to this on StoneNet, and as you can see, 60 seconds, it tells you all about Parliament. And what you've got there are the main functions of Parliament. The first one is very, very simple. It's to legislate. Parliament is the legislature. Its job is to create laws. Nobody else can make statute law. Remember that. That is part of the principle, the general constitutional principle of parliamentary sovereignty. It's also there to represent the people, that is doing the democratic thing. If we have an issue, we can take it to Parliament, and it is our representatives' job to advocate for our interests and to bring local matters to the interest of government, and indeed to speak for the people on matters of national significance. So representing the people, one of the key features, one of the core functions, sorry, of Parliament. They're also there to debate issues, and in debating issues, what they should be doing is educating and informing and even evaluating matters. The question, I suppose, that follows is for whose benefit are they doing this? Is it for government? Is it for us? Or indeed, maybe, is it for both? I mean, many of these debates don't have a sort of formal outcome. The government can look at them and go, yeah, well, whatever. But at the same time, there's an educational role, there's an informational role, an evaluation role. And even if the government isn't obliged to take account of the outcome of these parliamentary debates, in fact, we're not obliged to take account of the outcome of these debates, nevertheless, they fulfill an important function in airing matters, and in a democracy that's got to be a good thing. More importantly, perhaps, is the idea that Parliament's job is to challenge government, to check that government is doing a proper job. And again, we're looking at a core feature of Parliament's role here, that is of parliamentary government. You'll remember that according to the principles of parliamentary government, government has to be accountable to Parliament, and in challenging the government, Parliament is holding the government to account. It is checking that it is doing its job, and it's checking that when government is making a decision, it's evaluating matters properly, it's coming to the right conclusions, it's going through the right processes. So, challenging government, a core function of Parliament. Another one of those core functions of parliamentary government is to supply ministers. All ministers of government must also sit in Parliament. If you're going to be in government, you have to be in Parliament. House of Commons, House of Lords, doesn't really matter. In the UK, we have that fused government. So fused executive, the executive must be part of the legislature. And again, here we see a core difference with places like America, where they have a strict observance of the separation of powers. You can't simultaneously be in the executive and the legislature. Barack Obama was a congressman. He had to resign, he was a senator actually, he had to resign from the Senate in order to take his seat in the White House. Now in the UK, the system is entirely different. You can't be in government unless you're in Parliament, although of course what we find when we look into that is that the whole thing is subject to a fair degree of abuse is quite a strong word, but I'm going to use it, abuse. But perhaps one of the most important and least well understood functions of Parliament is to confer legitimacy on government. Now remember, nobody voted for the Prime Minister. Nobody voted for David Cameron as Prime Minister. Even the good citizens of Witney didn't vote for him as Prime Minister. They voted for him as MP for Witney. Similarly, nobody votes for the Home Secretary. Nobody votes for the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. What we do is we return MPs, and then we have drawn from that, based on this particular principle here, the idea of government. Government does not have any direct legitimacy. It doesn't have any direct authority. All of the authority, all of the legitimacy is retained in Parliament. And it's only with the consent of Parliament that the government is able to get on and do its job. So government relies for its legitimacy, for its authority on Parliament. And if Parliament withdraws that, then the government loses its legitimacy and its authority, and the government is forced to resign. So, for example, in 1979, the government resigned. Jim Callaghan remained an MP, even though he was no longer leader of government. He was still an MP. He still sat in Parliament. What he wasn't anymore was Prime Minister. So one of Parliament's critical job is to decide whether or not government still has its confidence. Now, all of this will make an awful lot more sense if you take the time to watch these programs. Now, there are 4 of them. They are cached on StoneNet. They're an hour each. That's 4 hours of your life, but it is an invaluable assessment. It's a really, really important assessment. a really, really important investment that you can make. And the more time you spend with these particular programs, the more familiar you will become with the nature of British government and politics, and you will be a better student. Now, this is here because the question who runs Parliament is answered in this program several times over, and it's this bloke. Actually, I think he's resigned now, but he is responsible for the day-to-day management of Parliament. But really, we're not particularly interested in that. What we're interested in is who manages government, who manages Parliament business, who decides what Parliament is doing from one day to the next. And the key thing here is this notion of usual channels, which probably, well, it really should upset you greatly because it's incredibly vague. What the hell are the usual channels? Well, according to Erskine May, remember him, he's one of the sources of the Constitution. He's one of those works of authority. And when we look at Erskine May, he says the usual channels in the House of Commons comprise the government chief whip and the chief whip from the main opposition party. However, there are others who are involved in behind-the-scenes negotiations, specifically the private secretary to the government chief whip, the leader of the House, who's a cabinet member, and the opposition leaders. In other words, numerous people are involved with setting the daily agenda of Parliament, but of those, the vast majority are drawn from government. So in other words, the day-to-day business of Parliament is set by government, and that is very, very, very important. There has been all sorts of talk about reforming that. There has been piecemeal reform in letting Parliament manage its own business, but in reality, government decides what Parliament does, and this is particularly important. It's a rather obscure point, but it's one that we'll come back to again and again and again. One of the things that Parliament tries to do sometimes, Parliament tries to assert itself, but the government won't let it. That should be giving you cause for concern. I hope it does. Anyway, I look forward to discussing that with you later. So, as I said, who has control of the parliamentary timetable? Well, basically, it's the government. The majority of government's time, the majority of Parliament's time is decided by the government, and it's spent doing government business. Some time is given to opposition parties, and some time is given to the control of the backbench business committee, but in reality, the government decides what Parliament is going to be doing from one minute to the next. Now, this is another little film that you can watch. I urge that you chase it up. The link is on Stonet. You'll have lots of questions after that. We will explore each of these functions in detail, but it won't hurt you to have a look at that in the short term. And I look forward to answering your questions as they come up. See you soon. Bye now.